and welcome to another episode of Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ian Miller. Today, I'm joined by I'm going to say legend because you kind of are a legend. He's done countless BBC radio productions such as The Adventures of Superman, Superman Doomsday and Beyond, Batman Nightfall. He's done the Sandman series for Audible. And today we're talking about his latest project for Audible. It is DC Comics' Elseworld story, Kingdom Come. Please welcome Dirk Maggs. Dirk, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ian. That's really lovely of you to have me aboard. I'm so grateful. And my wife has just walked in the house, and I hope she knows I'm on a Zoom interview.
It's all right. It's all right. Yeah, you can't believe how much I've been looking forward to this because I've been a big fan of your work for a number of years now. So, yeah, let's get to it. So, why don't you briefly tell our audience how you got started in this business?
Well, I wanted to get into movies. I wanted to make films or television. And that was my original ambition. But before that, I wanted to be an actor. So I trained to be a drama teacher because I thought if I couldn't get any work, at least I could teach. This was my theory. Unfortunately, this fell apart because A, I discovered I wasn't a very good actor, and B, I discovered I wasn't a very good teacher. So that went out the window. So when I finished the teacher training course and got my degree, somebody I knew joined the BBC in sound, in radio. Kind of in those days working tape recorders and operating the sound desks. Obviously times have changed since then. Tape recorders have gone the way of the dodo. And I really liked playing with tape recorders at the time. I liked messing around with sound. So I got in and I managed to get myself a job as what they called a studio manager, which sounds like somebody who goes around with a duster afterwards cleaning up, but actually was operating the gear, was studio engineer. And I very quickly got into television, BBC television, and I discovered I just wasn't enjoying it at all. It was just such a literal medium. It wasn't and I mean, don't get me wrong, I love pictures, I love watching stuff, all of that, but it just wasn't for me. It was too limiting on the imagination. But audio, I'd already, I used to love listening to it. The BBC has a long tradition of comedy shows, The Goon Show with Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan, and the Monty Python crew all came from BBC Radio originally, pretty much. So, there was a rich tradition there. So I worked my way into the comedy department at the BBC. And that was where one of the things that got me the job was you had to pitch the couple of ideas, and if they bought one, they might hire you. And in fact, they bought two. I sold them a quiz show, which was kind of very, in retrospect, probably not a great idea. But also, I sold them the idea of doing a docudrama about Superman's 50th birthday, because that was 1988, and it was 1938 when Action Comics #1 came out. And they bought it. And we made it, and I wrote it. I didn't direct it because I was too junior to be a director. But what I did do was I went over. I didn't realize I was being a bad boy, but I went over the head of my boss, and I rang the equivalent of TV Guide over here is called the Radio Times. Yeah. And I rang the editor of Radio Times. This is an internal BBC publication as well. And I said, "We're doing Superman. Would you like it for the cover?" And he said, "Yeah." And who would you like to do it? And I'd already had Dave Gibbons into the studio to be a witness for Superman's trial, a witness for the defense. The defense led by Lois Lane. The prosecution was Lex Luthor. They'd obviously been doing a lot of evening classes in Metropolis, on Be Your Own Lawyer. Anyway, the guy took it, and as evidenced here, that is a Radio Times cover which Dave drew of Superman. It got me in big trouble with my boss. You can't just ring up. But I think it was one of the last Radio Times covers they got, because it usually went to TV. So I did well. Anyway, and that got me into doing superheroes, and I had a very good relationship with DC Comics. a lovely lady called Phyllis Hume, lovely Brooklyn lady, very New York sense of humor, so quite British, taking the piss. And Phyllis was wonderful, and she kind of, she became my kind of touchstone. And we went on to do then a Batman docudrama in 1990 with Michael Gough, who was in the movies at that time as Alfred, playing Alfred because he's British. And a guy called Bob Sessions playing Batman, who was, had a particular delivery, which I'm sure we'll touch on when we get to Kingdom Come. And then we did Adventures of Superman, which I basically drew from the John Byrne comics of the post-crisis reinvention that John Byrne did, which I thought was a revelation when I read it. I thought, this has cleaned all the lines up of the character and of the story. And it particularly, I liked it because Lex Luthor in it had become a sort of politician. He was legit. And it's interesting how current events seem to be echoing, if you'll excuse me. So we did 2 series of Adventures of Superman for BBC Radio 4. This is like, I'm trying to think of a cultural parallel, with the US, but this is kind of like the Beatles smoking pot in the toilets at Buckingham Palace, to do Superman on Radio 4 is a kind of revolutionary fervor going on there. I certainly wouldn't get away with it now. Anyway, we did that, and then we did Batman Nightfall. That was the one I was really pleased with because it was I didn't think they'd go for it. They were looking for a daily drama that kids could listen to on the way home from school on their Walkmans, as it was, for BBC Radio 1, which was the kind of pop music, was a really kind of hot, trendy pop music channel. And what they wanted was something that would keep the audience going at about that time of day and get kids listening. And there was a big meeting with the boss of Radio 1 who was looking for a drama. And I just thought, well, they're going to want some kind of socially important kind of thing about, downtrodden people living in a squat in Hackney or something, kind of something terribly conscience ridden and worthy. And they went around the room, and there was some real heavy hitters in there. Armando Iannucci, who did In the Loop and stuff like that. Armando was in there. He was one of my colleagues, and he pitched something. And I mean, a load of other people who became very, very strong comedy producers. And I was the last. There was about 15 of us. I was the last in the room. And I just thought, well, I'll just throw it in the mix. How about doing Batman? And he goes, that's the one, Dirk. You'll get it. And then he said, and this was where it kind of all fell apart. He said, and can you do it in 3 minutes a day?
Oh, God.
And I'm like, And of course, I just went, yeah, no problem. And I walked out of the office and I went down the corridor to my office. And I was, oh, my God. Anyway, and then it occurred to me, if I'm digressing too much, Ian, just shut me up.
No. Go ahead.
But it occurs to me, actually, 3 minutes a day was really good. I'd already think I floated the idea with DC because the previous year we'd done the Superman, the Death and Life of Superman story as an audio. And we'd done it in kind of conjunction as the comic books were coming out. We were making the story in audio to the point we were slightly ahead of them. And I was using scripts by Roger Stern and Louise Simonson and all of that because there was no artwork, but we did that and it worked really, really well. So I thought, well, we can do that. So I got in touch with Charlie Kochman and Scott Peterson, who Scott was then editing. No, Denny O'Neill was editing. But Scott was kind of running interference for him from irritating people like me, and he said, this is a possibility. You did this thing last year. We were happy with you. Mike Carlin thought you did a good job on Superman. I'm sure Denny will on Batman. So, okay, fine. So I thought I was in the chance. I was just thinking, how the heck this is going to 3 minutes an episode, and I pretty much knew by then how long the Nightfall story arcs were going to run across the 4 comics.
Yeah.
I thought this is going to be about 65 episodes. This is insane.
Uh,
And then I thought, well, hang on a minute. No, it isn't, because 2 things. First of all, it's a serial. So, there's going to be, you end with a cliffhanger and pick up and all of that. And the other thing I thought was, it's going to really move like lightning, like grease lightning, because it's got to. And the other thing I thought was, and this was when the Writers Guild of Great Britain newsletter came out, and I was a member, and the head of the Writers Guild, they kind of announced 3 minutes a day drama on BBC Radio 1. And he said, I don't believe anything worthy can be written in 3 minutes a day.
oh.
So I thought, all right, mate. All right, let's see about that. So there was an incentive, but I was also just thinking about comic book pages, and if you take a comic book page and let's just say it's vanilla 6 panels or something like that.
Yeah.
What have you got? Any random page you open up, and what you have at the top of the page, the first panel, is going to be where the story continues from the previous page, and you're going to hit the ground running and move along. So that will be the first 2 panels. The second 2 panels are going to have something happen. There's going to be some kind of story beat, some kind of incident, whatever it is. And then the last 2 panels kind of either sort of show you the direction that's going to go in, or have the cliffhanger, which makes you turn the page, and then you get to, and then it starts all over again. So each 3-minute episode, not literally, I don't mean, but in a sense, would be like a comic book page. You hit the ground running at the beginning, you bam, 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 bam. You then have the big incident, whatever it might be, and then out you go on a kind of, but what do we do? And then, and now turn the page, or continue tomorrow. So that was really the kind of light bulb moment, which then became the sort of guiding light for the whole thing. And the only trick was, if I can extend the metaphor slightly, is that if you're doing that, you have this sort of, each episode is a little arc, and so you've got a kind of sine wave going on when you glue it all together. And because it needed to all be glued together, I needed to make sure there was a kind of a continuity that wasn't just kind of, we're into the story, big beat, cliffhanger, we're into the story, big beat, cliffhanger. So, but the way the story was written kind of guaranteed that wouldn't happen. But that was that was the big eye opener. I had this sort of, I'd already got the kind of using cinematic audio values to make it sound good, where it's you really in-depth sound design from Foley to deep background. You've got cinematic music, hopefully originally composed by somebody.
Yeah.
So I had all that, and then really with a really good cast, which we had, you end up with something that really bangs along. So that was Nightfall, and people who don't know or may not pick up, I hope they don't pick up now, that it was originally 3-minute episodes, but that's what it was. So that was a really good education as to how to kind of keep the thing on its toes and keep the audience interested.
Well, it definitely worked. I mean, my God, I had read stellar reviews for that particular one, and people over here in America, were waiting for the tapes of the recordings.
Yeah, that was a big moment when Phyllis rang me when it was finally finished and it got released, and she said, "You'll never guess, I was in a 7-Eleven or something, like, a Quick Mart or whatever it was, and it was on the counter at the checkout or whatever it is." It's like, yes. That was a magic moment. But that was the thing, really. I was doing other stuff. I was doing comedy stuff. I was doing a whole bunch of recreated Marx Brothers shows from the scripts that were found at the end of the 80s, and I was doing a weekly kind of very British end of the pier, ribald, carry on humor, satirical, topical show. So these were kind of all part of the job, as it were. but it was a
Yeah.
really sort of fecund period, if I can use the word,
Mhm.
then where everything was happening, and it gave me the chance to play with the best kind of box of Legos anyone could have, really. You
Yeah.
know, it's DC
Yeah.
Comics, it's the DC universe, so it was good. And the other thing that
Absolutely.
happened from it was my boss down the corridor from the office where I got that job, he rang me and said, Dirk, I've had a call from Douglas Adams, who's heard your Superman and really likes it, and he thinks you might be the bloke to bring the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy back home to radio, because it had
Yeah.
gone to television and then books by then. And so I was round at Douglas's house in Islington before I'd put the phone down almost. You know, it was that kind of like, wow. And so that opened up a whole other thing. And then I was doing, bringing hitchhikers back to life. It actually took longer than Douglas or I wanted, and sadly he was dead by then. But it was it's amazing. I always think that Superman and Batman have saved me probably as many times as Superman saved Jimmy or something like that, you know. Yeah.
Well, it opened up new doors to you, I think, because you're taking this material that's, very well protected and all that, and you just adding your own spin to it, and you're being true to the source material, and people are just eating it up. So, yeah, it makes perfect sense that you'll be, penned in to do the rest of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which, by the way, I enjoyed thoroughly.
Oh, I'm so glad. That's great. Yeah. No, well, it was great, and it was a fantastic period. We did some Marvel, we did the Amazing Spider-Man, we did a bit of 2000 AD, the British comic, we did Judge Dredd, 2 series of that, and then I thought, and then we were really on a roll, and 20th Century Fox in London rang up and said, "Do you want to make a British version of Independence Day?" And I said, "What's Independence Day apart from the holiday?" And he said, "Well, they're making this movie about, and so on." I thought, oh, it's War of the Worlds, it's Wells. And I thought, if you're doing a radio version of an invasion from another planet, Mercury Theatre in 1938 set out a pretty good template for that.
I know.
It's so cool. So anyway, I sort of said, yeah. And they said, well, Dean Devlin wants you to fly out to Long Beach to talk to him about it. So I thought, okay, right, I don't mind. It's not my dime. So I flew out, met Dean, who was about 12 years old, and lovely bloke. And he said, and we talked about about the whole thing and da-dee-dee-dee-da, and they just finished principal photography on it, I think, if I remember rightly. Anyway, and he said, I said, so what can I do? Can I base it on the War of the Worlds and the Mercury Theatre? And he said, yeah, sure. He said, just one thing. The British can't win. You have to leave it. The Americans have to win this. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I don't mind, it's cool. It's fine.
Yeah.
And in fact, it just gave me a really good gag line when one of the pilots says to another, the RAF pilot says to the other, of course, whatever happens, the Yanks will claim credit for this. So, and Dean cleared it. He cleared it with a note saying, "I see what you did there," But that was it. And then I left the BBC. I thought, right, okay, I'm going to be doing a lot of this. And I left the BBC and everything stopped. The whole thing stopped completely. So, I had other things to do. There were Agatha Christie's and what have you. And then there was Hitchhikers actually finally happened. So, that was fine. We did the audio of that. And then we did Dirk Gently, the 2 finished books of Dirk Gently. And then we had a Hitchhikers live show. And then I'd been trying for ages, off the back of the success of the comic books, to sell the BBC on the idea of doing some stuff by Neil Gaiman. Because The Sandman was an epic piece of work. Phyllis, my friend from Brooklyn, introduced me to it. She said, have you met this guy, Neil Gaiman? And I said, well, Britain is small compared to America, but it's not that small. She said, well, you should read this stuff. And she sent me this stuff. And I just thought, holy smoke, this is, obviously good stuff.
Yeah.
And I tried to tell to get the BBC interested, look, here we got homegrown talent. And this was 1993, 4. And they just didn't, it wasn't a thing for them. So it kind of fell by the wayside. So I thought, never mind, excuse me. So I didn't really think about it. And then, but I'd been in touch with Neil. At the time, do you mind if I pitch this? Sure, he says, because it doesn't belong to me. It's DC Comics property, Sandman. Yeah. But then he was doing some stuff with BBC Radio 4, and one of the BBC internal in-house producers, like I used to be, emailed me and said, would you like to adapt Neverwhere, Neil's novel about London Below? And so I said, yeah, I'd love to, thinking, bugger, I wish it was the Sandman, but, what can you do? And then I read Neverwhere and I thought, oh, this is actually really good. And anyway, long story short, we did Neverwhere, we did Good Omens, a radio version. We did the Stardust, which I loved. I was really pleased with that. That was a really good one. And then we did How the Marquis Got His Coat Back, and then we did a Nancy Boys. I adapted a Nancy Boys. By then, which time I was making Alien dramas for Audible, and this was where I first started working properly for Audible. Which was good because it was a learning curve where they weren't doing a lot of multi-voice stuff, and I didn't want to compromise how I did things. And by now I'd worked in Dolby 5.1 surround, on the Hitchhikers shows, on the series I did, because that was the thing. Douglas and I were trying to think, how can we make it different? Oh, surround sound. Douglas was all over that. BBC hated the idea. The senior engineer at Broadcasting House saw me. I was walking down to get my sandwich at lunchtime one day, and he crossed the road on Regent Street rather than because he knew I'm like, come on, we got to do it. Anyway, we did Hitchhikers in 5.1, and I gave them a stereo mix because not to upset anybody like you do. And so when we got to Audible, there was a lot of things I asked about, like if we do these alien things, please can we make sure it's stereo, the equivalent. I know you're going to use algorithms to compress this like MP3, but listen, it's got to be in stereo. It's got to be a high quality listen, and so on. And ideally, we ought to do it in some kind of surround format.
Yeah.
And I kind of got my wish over a period of time. But the thing was, we did Alien Out of the Shadows, this really good book by Tim Levin, which is set between Alien, the movie, and Aliens. Yeah. And it involves Ripley, a kind of Ripley woken up, gets involved with a bunch of aliens, and then falls asleep again, having forgotten all about it, conveniently in time for the second movie. But a really great book. Had a lot of fun with that because I love the idea of having a key character. The sort of almost the main character is the alien that's roaming the ship, and it has no dialogue. It's all got to be conveyed in sound effects, which was really fun. I love a challenge like that. And so we did. He ended up with doing 3. There were 3 Titan titles. Titan Books in Britain released these titles by Tim and James Moore and Chris Golden, and then I got a message from somebody. There was some conversation on what was Twitter. Somebody asked Neil about Sandman ever being made as something, and he said, it's not up to me, it's up to DC. And Sandy Resnick, who was VP in charge of licensing at DC at that point, who, when I was talking to Phyllis back in the day, was like making the coffee. He's now VP in charge of, paper clips. No, that's not, sorry, Sandy, I don't mean that. He was a hugely important and influential figure. And he emailed me, he said, Dirk, do you think wonder if we should revive the idea of or I know you were talking about Sandman, you couldn't sell it, but do you think it would be worth trying to get it going again? And I said, fuck yeah. And he said, do you think Neil would be interested? And so I emailed Neil and told him. Neil came back and said, fuck yeah. Anyway, excuse my French, sorry. And then we were off to the races, and then we were going to do Sandman. And that was obviously, great because it's a major piece of work, and yeah. I know we're in a strange period where stuff has happened and what have you, but I'm still hugely proud of what we did because everybody involved gave it their heart and soul, and it's the best work I've ever done, as far as I'm concerned. So we were doing that, and we begin, and then we managed to, do stuff in Atmos, and all of this was going on. I lost my thread. Where was I going with that, Ian? But then, but finally we were doing this thing that I'd wanted to do for nearly 30 years. We had the most fantastic cast. Audible were being brilliant. Nothing was too much trouble if they could do it. The first series, the last episode where we do the Midsummer Night's Dream, which I had to write basically with about 2/3 of the actual Midsummer Night's Dream as background action. So we spent about 3 hours in studio just recording Shakespeare, which was kind of brilliant practice, but very, very weird. But it was the cast weren't quite expecting that. But there were about 15 people in this thing the size of a shoebox because they only had one voice readings. And by the end of it, the AC packed up after about 20 minutes. It was like, it just said, I'm not doing this. And everybody's a sweat running. And they go, oh, my sinner, my Lord, my this, what sweet juices flow, and all this stuff. And it's just kind of like, what? Anyway, the next series, they built us a purpose-built drama studio, AC, room to breathe, beautiful lighting, all of this stuff. So, I can't speak highly enough of Audible. But what did happen and that was interesting on that was I started writing the adaptations, and then they announced the Netflix series of Sandman. And that was, I suddenly thought, now that's going to be an issue because I gussy stuff up a bit, I don't embroider as much as sympathetically enhance what's there. And so I was, there's all sorts of stuff going on. And a tiny bit of what I was doing is still in the first episode of the first series of Sandman, where where Anton Rogers' character, the man who finds this Magdalen manuscript book for the Aleister Crowley character, he's doing a diary. Well, it was going to be much more about his diary. It's not his diary in the actual comic, but I kind of thought, I can run with that idea. Anyway, they announced a TV show, and of course, the thing about TV that happens is that in TV, in my job, there's me and the author and the actors and maybe the guy doing the music, and that's it. That's the team. In television, you've got it takes a village, but it takes a village of quite self-important people who all have an opinion. And a few village idiots, I might add. And so I thought, well, it's going to be changed. It's not going to be the same for television. They are not going to take the comics and just roll with what's there. They're going to do their own embroidery on it. So how can I be different? Well, I could be inside the author's head while he's writing it. We can go into the world that's in his head in the act of writing it. And that's when Neil and I always had a conversation about narrators, because I'm not a fan of narrators. I love to do audio where there's no narrator and be kind of daring and just hell, just go for it, you know.
Yeah.
And Neil, you know, he likes the author's voice to be heard, and he said, "Look, if you ever want a narrator on this, I'll do it." And I said, "I'll bear that in mind." He said, "Or you could get Benedict Cumberbatch, you know, or whatever." And then I said, "Yeah, but Benedict didn't bloody write it, did he?" But in the end, I thought, oh well, if I go down that road, then we are in the guy's head as he's writing it. And not only that, because he had given me the original scripts, there's an awful lot of stuff in there which is actually directions to the artist, Mike Dringenberg or whoever else is on it, and Colleen Doran, or, you know, all these brilliant artists on Sandman. But the thing is, sometimes not all of those descriptions get into the final artwork, or sometimes they're actually quite hard to spot, because, you know, reading comics is a sort of a skill. And I certainly found, after not having done them for a bit, actually it had deserted me a bit, and I was missing details. So getting the scripts really helped, but then actually getting details that sort of helped add to the atmosphere. I'm thinking, you know, there's a clock ticking away, an old clock in the hallway at the manor house where what's his face, Roderick Burgess lives. You know, oh well, great. Yeah. I'll have a really full of character old grandfather clock creaking away there, that sort of thing. So that's how I went at it. I thought, I'm going to have to be super adhere really closely to the original text, and that's what we did. We had the narrator narrating, who is the writer, who is giving you what the writer's point of view is, and I can put into what he's saying stuff he's actually telling the artist, but now we're telling the listener. And if I then add, you know, a shed load of great sound effects, and you know, and we've got music by James Hannigan, who's a bloody genius, and his music is magic, you know, which is, we have a situation where we're gonna make something that's really gonna be loaded with atmosphere. So that's the positive side. I found a way of not doing what the TV people were going to do, which is turn it into something that, you know, it wasn't on the page. But the downside is then that people get the idea that I've actually made it for you to read along to. It's kind of, you have to have the comic book in your hand to do that, and I'm not against doing that in the least. Any way you enjoy it is fine by me, but that's not the original reason to make it in audio. The real reason to make it in audio is because your brain is the best CGI computer ever invented. Well, up to this point, till the AI bubble bursts, folks. You know, and it doesn't go in through the optical nerve, it goes in through the side door, and then the picture is around you, and, you know, you are in the world. And, you know, it's that old cliche of, you know, you're on the deck of a schooner rounding Cape Horn with a force 10 gale in freezing weather, and it's snowing sideways, and you're any minute going to be swept overboard, but actually you're lying in bed comfortably, you know, in your warm bed in your cozy room. You know, there's that kind of thing. So that's always been my you know, my way into doing things, is create a world you can live in your head.
Yeah, I remember listening to Sandman for the first time, you know, and I kept thinking, how did he do it? How did he describe it so perfectly? And you just answered that question for me using the original comic scripts to help you guide you that way. But one of the key points of that audio drama that really got to me was the John Constantine section, you know, where he's going into his ex-lover's house, you know, with Dream.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, the sound effects were just electric.
I'm so glad, because that took a lot of thinking about, because in the comic book, you know, suddenly they're falling in through the sky, and Dream has to kind of pluck him back into reality, John Constantine, as he's having his cadenza. And at the time I thought, this has really got to make you feel like you've suddenly been, you know, dropped from a great height. And then it's And funnily enough, that piece, that about a minute of action is what I use to audition sound designers for later series of Sandman and things like that, because I just give them the voices and say, right now, here's the script, there's the pages of the comic book. Make me believe that we're suddenly falling through the air. It's actually an interesting one. It's a bellwether kind of example you're giving there.
Yeah. So I think at this point, people know your resume now, and they definitely are going to look you up now. I can make sure of that. Let's talk about Kingdom Come for a second. How did that come about?
Well, I was kind of on the rebound at the beginning of this year. Not having the big project I had been working on had suddenly, sort of been disappeared into thin air. I was like John Constantine. I was suddenly falling through the air.
Man.
And there's the head of Penguin Random House Audio, Dan Zitt. He comes over at least once a year to the UK for the book fair, the publishers' kind of book fair thing in the springtime. And we usually meet in a pub and drink an awful lot of beer and talk about life, the universe, and everything. And he was over this year, and he said, "Are you busy?" And I said, "No, I'm the opposite of busy." And he said, would you be interested in talking about projects? And I said, and I honestly said at the time, I said, you know what, at the moment I'm slightly shell shocked, and I'm not sure if I'm going to bring my A game to anything. He said, well, come and have lunch. So we met in a pub for lunch, and the trains were running late, so we had half an hour before we had to go back to a session. So he said, I'll just lay it on the table. Would you be interested in doing a Superman? And I said, kind of been there, done that. He said, Kingdom Come. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. Not least because in '96, when Kingdom Come came out, Marvels had already come out with Alex's art in it, I think, by then. And just like, what is this? This is bloody amazing. And then Kingdom Come comes out, and of course it's all my favorite characters. And I think I rang, and this is something I'm not sure about, so this is kind of my memory may be at fault, but I think I rang Charlie Kochman almost as soon as it came out at DC, and I said, are the rights available on Kingdom Come? He said, I don't know. He said, I said, because I'd really like to do it. He said, okay. And he said, do you want to talk to Alex about it? Because Alex is a mate of his. I said, God, yeah, So I actually had a phone call with Alex, and it was expensive, but I didn't mind because transatlantic call. I mean, a good chat, and it was a good talk, and he was saying, great, why not? And I'd explain what I did, and I think he'd heard some stuff. And then blow me down. Someone else got the rights, some other bunch of folks, and they made a version, and it wasn't in my style, let's put it that way, and I was disappointed, and I thought, that's one that I missed that one. There were two comics, two graphic novels that I would love to have done. One was Kingdom Come, and the other was Dark Knight Returns. Dark Knight Returns. I wanted to do, and I wanted to do it with Adam West. I desperately wanted to do it with Adam West. I so wanted. And Adam was in our first Superman thing. He came into BBC to do. He was doing, they were Batman. The Batman TV shows were back on, and he came in, and I saw him come in through the main door of Broadcasting House. I thought, shit, it's Adam West. I've got to get him on the show. So I just went up to him, went past all the minders, and I just said, Mr. West, and he was lovely. And I said, we're doing this thing about Superman. Would you appear as a witness for the defense? He said, sure. As soon as I've done this interview, I'll come and collect me and I'll do something for you. And he did this. Sorry, I'm digressing now. But I went and got it. And I quickly ran away and I wrote a little script, and I wanted him to give genuine answers. So, what do you think a world without a Superman would be like, or all of this stuff? He was just bloody brilliant. I just pulled him into a little 2-man studio, rolled the tape, got talking, and he was wonderful. And he said one of his lines was, and And this was him just talking normally, like just conversationally. He said, yeah, if in a world without Superman, I would feel shattered, torpedoed, riven. It's like, what? It's just so, the language is
Yeah.
so rich. You know, that kind of gave me the idea. If ever Dark Knight Returns, it's got to be Adam. Never happened. But Kingdom Come was, you know, suddenly in the offing. So I read it again. And I think nowadays my tastes have changed a little bit because I thought, wow, it's pretty dark. You know, it's pretty, there's, you know, the whole, I'm kind of Armageddon, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I kind of would love to have, there's something, it's a bit like Star Trek, the original series, you know, that was all about a future where we live, where we survive, you know, where we've actually learned to be nice to people who aren't like us, to enjoy the differences, etc., you know, all the Gene Roddenberry idic stuff.
Yeah.
But at the core of it is a bloody good story about, you know, all these people have all got all this power, but nobody really knows what they are. They don't always know what to do about it. And the idea of Superman actually having lost confidence in himself, you know, we can all identify with the, how should we say, imposter syndrome and all of that. You know, this new guy comes along who's ostensibly fighting evil and doing good things. But his tactics are so extreme that Superman, when he tries to bring the guy in, you know, to bring him to justice, actually kind of loses the case.
Yeah.
And Superman's like, well, you know, and it's very relevant today where, you know, you think the public really want that instead of this. And, you know, this is Superman kind of saying they want to have this kind of extreme attitude rather than somebody who's balanced and decent and trying to do the right thing and do as you would be done by and all of those things. So I liked that very much. And I thought it was very interesting that, and then you have the broken down Batman who's, you know, who's basically battle worn and scarred and still fighting crime with his Bat Knights, his robot Batmen in the city of Gotham. And then Wonder Woman, who hasn't apparently aged a bit, but has got this sort of edge on her, who's a little bit, you know, she's kind of got tough and sort of disillusioned in a way. You know, she's been thrown off of the island, you know, thrown out of what's
Themyscira.
Yeah, Themyscira, sorry.
That's all right. It's all right.
Brain emptied like a sieve. So, you know, all the characters were really interesting. And of course, then you've got the grown-up Billy Batson and Captain Marvel, who's always a slightly weirdly conflicted figure in the DC universe because he didn't start there. He kind of arrived there from somewhere else. And Mark Waid is so clever, the writer, he knows so much about DC lore. He is the walking encyclopedia. You know, you could plug him into a computer and he'd beat it at DC trivia, you know. So it was, you know, I have to do this. And of course, having done Superman before, I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back to Metropolis. I wanted to go back to Gotham City. I wanted to get back in our cast from the original Supermans. And I got Lorelei King, who was Lois. She now plays Wonder Woman.
She is phenomenal. Yeah, she's
amazing.
Always phenomenal. But in this one, she really brought it home because there were certain lines that Diana says, you know, and the way Lorelei actually delivers the line, I was like, oh, that's perfect.
Oh, I'm so glad, Ian. Well, I'm biased because I think she's fantastic. I've worked with her for 35 years, you know, but she is fantastic. Stuart Milligan, my original Superman, they already had a Superman. They had Mark. And so I was desperate to get Stuart in. But when it became clear that it had to be Mark, Stuart said, I'd rather not play another part if I can't be Supes. And I got it. He and I were both quite upset about it. But on the other hand, Mark is amazing and brilliant and a lovely guy, and he gave it everything. in the sessions. He worked almost in the dark. He came in a Superman t-shirt, which I love. And I said, I'm working remotely. He's in Texas and I'm over here in England. I fly over when I can, but at the moment I'm not doing a lot of travel to the States. But he was there in the dark, and I said, yeah, shall I have a Zoom link to you, a picture link like this, and I'm sitting in here, and he's kind of like this, this is Mark. That's all I can see. But no, fantastic job. And then we what I wanted to do, and I work as an ensemble. I do ensemble work. I have all the actors in a room if I can.
Yeah.
So they have eye contact. They can physically act with each other. In fact, I put up stereo pairs of mics where people can actually move around in front of them. Some of the crowd scenes, you'll hear people moving in a room because that's what they're doing. And that was kind of a slight learning curve. This is where I'd been with Audible, and we'd worked it out, and had to start kind of again with the folks at Penguin, because they don't do a lot of ensemble stuff like that in the kind of BBC / Dirk style of doing things. So in the end, I did what we used to do on Sandman, which is I got in the characters that were cast, the American actors who live in London, because most George Lucas and Steven Spielberg epics that are shot in England feature these people, which is why Biggs Darklighter is now Wesley Dodds at the beginning of Kingdom Come. But we, in the end, what we did was, we did these ensemble groups of about 12 actors or so. And then if there were lines that were going to be performed by American actors, including Mark as Superman, we'd read them in. So we had sort of placeholders. So the action, we could get a sense of logic and consistency and meshing together of the action. So that's how we do it. It was a week in studio, but it meant that we really could get a sense of energy and action into it. And it always works better that way for me. I like to be in a room with a bunch of actors. That's my favorite place to be, unless I'm playing drums, which is my other thing. So so we did that, and then I was picking up the rest of the cast. There was Mark, there was Tim Lunabus, who plays Riddler and Americommando, E.A. Castillo, who's playing, I think she's playing Joker's daughter. They're playing Joker's daughter. Anyway, loads of brilliant, voice talent from the States. It's the best thing in the world for me, really. It's like a really nice chocolate cake. I just get all the chocolate, none of the sponge on this job, So we got it all together, and the guys at DC, Mike Pallotta and Victor Diaz, were there to kind of add guidance, as well as having the folks at Penguin. But editorially, really, I needed to talk to DC, because this is so complicated, and Alex and Mark are putting so much stuff in that isn't actually really part of the DC universe as we know it. There are characters who have been invented specifically for Kingdom Come, which means that there are moments where I'm sort of peering with a magnifying glass at the artwork, even on a computer. I'm kind of blowing it up, and what the hell is that murky? And because in the script it says in the background Black Mongol battles Wonder Woman, and it's like, okay. And then I coming down to I have to find a way of introducing zillions of new characters very quickly, and then dropping them again. And I was saying to someone this morning, it's a bit like one of those puppet theaters, you have as a kid, where you push on little people on sticks, and then they come on, and then they get whipped out. So up comes Black Mongol. How about you, Wonder Woman? He says as they sword fight or something, and then she says they fight, and then it sort of goes in the background. There's a lot of that going on, but I think it hangs together okay. I just felt guilty if I wasn't. You have a character like Green Lantern, you know, and it's the Alan Watson. It's not Guy. It's Alan. Green
Yeah.
Lantern. It's a whole different. You know, you got to know which character you got. Which Flash have I got? It's not Golden Age. It's not Silver Age. Is it post Crisis? Yes. Is it? You know, and this is the one that you can't see. He moves at the speed of thought or whatever it is. And then, oh, geez, how do we get that effect? And I think, oh, come on, Dirk, you did Aliens. You can do a bloke zipping about, you know, all this stuff. So, you know, there are challenges. But on the other hand, what's really great is you get these solid performances. And the one real problem I had, or I thought I had, was Batman. Because when we did Batman back in the 90s, there was an actor called Bob Sessions, and he was a Broadway song and dance guy, very debonair, kind of handsome, kind of James Garner kind of looking guy. And he was in Britain, and he made his home in London, and they were doing 42nd Street or something like that. Anyway, I said, I need someone who sounds really good, but, you know, educated and all this. And he came in, and he had this very solid delivery and all this stuff, you know, because what I didn't want, because the Keaton film had just come out, and we had Michael as Alfred, the same as in the Keaton film. But what I didn't want to do was the I'm Batman thing that, you know, Keaton was doing, because I wanted a Batman who didn't have to put the voice on. It was already there, but it still was that of an educated scion of a wealthy family, you know, sort of somebody who'd done, you know, kind of the prep school and the Yale or the Harvard or whatever, you know. It was a certain type of character who then gave all that up to go and, you know, get down and dirty and fight crime. So it had to be someone who just naturally kind of fell into that. Well, Bob Sessions was perfect for that. And people, you know, as far as I know, people really loved his Batman. Well, he died about 20 years ago, you know, and it's like, oh, shoot, that's a real shame. You know, who have I got? And a few people read for it, and they read great, but there was something about the voice. And then somebody said, have you tried Glenn Rage, Wrage? And I said, I don't know Glenn Rage. And my son was with me at the time, and he said, you don't know Glenn Rage? Where have you been? What rock have you been hiding under? And he's in all these games, and I do actually play games, but I hadn't played any with Glenn in anyway. So I listened to his reels, like, oh my God, this is the guy. And he came in and he did it. He was actually, I think he comes from Queens, you know, he's just up the road from you. But he lives in London as well. And he came in, and he had it. It was that disillusioned playboy who fights crime, but it's sort of 30 years later, and he's kind of held up with magnets or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, you know, having a core cast as good as we had, and then this ensemble of good all-rounders who could offer a few voices. And I was particularly pleased with Magog, our casting for Magog, which this guy Tom Alexander read for. And DC totally went for him, which was a relief for me, because he's my son. He's my oldest boy. Tom Alexander, that's his stage name. And I didn't want that. There's no Nepo baby going on with this. He had to, if he got the part, he got the part. But he is a talented boy, and he got it. So I was very pleased, because I think he did a very good job. The Magog breakdown works really well.
I felt his pain in every single word. You know, especially his just being horrified at what had happened when it transpired. He's like, "Take me away." I'm like, "Wow,
yeah."
And that's your son? Wow, you got to be a very proud father there.
I'm a proud father, but actually, you know, I find it very hard to listen to that scene, because I'm listening to my kid break down.
Yeah.
It's really weird. Yeah. Evil supervillain though he is. Oh, and the other thing that was really great was being able to get Kerry Shale to reprise the Joker from our Batman Nightfall, because in Kingdom Come itself, you know, this is all done in flashback, and there's no speech bubbles. It's just Alex's amazing art and so on. And there's a bit of subtext in that scene, which if you don't know it, you, excuse me, pardon, I burped. If you don't know it, you don't actually get it. But Lois is one of the people the Joker kills at the Daily Planet in that scene. Well, that's not spelled out in the text anywhere in, there was until Magog says to Superman, 98 men died, and Superman says, and one woman. And then you go, big penny job. So it's a big old scene, and having Kerry, I had to like write some stuff in, some sub Joker kind of terrible jokes and all of that. But it was really lovely. We could have, there were a few effects. A lot of the sound effects, the flying sound effects were actually from 1988 and 1999.
I love that.
Yeah, just sharpened up a bit. And but the other voice from Batman Nightfall was the Batcave computer, which was Eric Myers. Finding possible list of subjects or whatever it is. And it's a nothing Easter egg for anyone who doesn't know Nightfall, but it's there with the original sound effect running underneath. And just a little gag, and this is a sort of, I shouldn't really say what, but occasionally you sneak something in. So every time anyone says Batgirl and Ace, you hear a dog bark. Yeah, because there was this sort of, it's a dog. It's a dog. Yeah. We've got a dog in this. James Gunn's not the only one who's got dogs. So,
yeah. I know I said this on my my social media posts, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. You gave. I don't like doing comparisons, but I will do it in this case. I did listen to the other version of Kingdom Come, and it had no spirit. It really didn't have a soul. If I'm being honest, the acting was good, but it just was missing something. And then when I heard you were doing it, I was like, okay, this could be something big. All right, this could be good. So the second I started listening to it and finished it, I was like, that was it. That was what it was missing. The heart was there, the soul was there, and the spirit of Mark's and Alex's work was there.
Oh, I'm grateful, if that's how it's coming across, because it's a labor of love. I mean, it's hard work, and I've got to say it was particularly hard because in a way, there's that saying, a man cannot serve two masters, and I kind of had DC and Penguin, and occasionally communications were flying around that way and not flying my way, and so there were moments where I'm thinking, this is harder than I think it needs to be, but we got past that, and then we managed to all get on the same page about it, and but all along, that what was good was mainly I was allowed just to get on with it. Nobody got it. People just trusted me to do it because they knew I loved it, and they knew that I'd been to these, been to Gotham and Metropolis before. But there is a lot of love in it, and also, and I do think there's something to be said for James Hannigan's music, which was nearly didn't happen, and I was desperate should happen, because Jim, I first came across, it's just a silly little story, but on the BBC productions of Stardust and Neverwhere and all of that, BBC don't have enough money for original music usually, not big orchestral stuff, but the games business does. And when I was finding mood music from they're not commercially available discs, but they're music libraries that pros use. They go under ads, you get sporting themes, you get all this stuff. But there's also like movie type stuff, and there's composers like Jim Hannigan, and I was trying to think of there's a couple of others now who are working in Hollywood who actually started just doing these music things, but these mood music things. So I went and I was just taking tracks I liked out to use under Neverwhere and Good Omens and Stardust and all of that. And then when it comes to the point where you note what you've used, how long it runs, and who composed it, so people get paid, because I believe in paying people, Ian. I know it's a revolutionary thought in this day and age of AI, but I think people should get paid.
Absolutely.
It was like 9 out of 10 of every cue was by this guy, James Hannigan. And so when we got to do the alien stuff at Audible, and I just, off the top of it, off the very beginning of the discussions with Steve Carsey, who was the commissioning editor then at Audible, and really very bright guy and very, very, he could see a long way. And I said, look, I want to do original music for this. And he said, oh, I don't think there's a budget for that. And I said, well, is there any way you could find a budget? Because I want to get this guy, James Hannigan, to do it. And he said, leave it with me. Anyway, he, corralled off some, budget. And we got Jim. And Jim wrote this alien music. And it was like, oh, my God, it's Jerry Goldsmith meets James Horner. But it's got this emotional, Jim Hannigan writes this, he's got just an emotional core to it, and I really try very hard to get the emotions going in the audio stuff that I do, because if you get emotionally involved, then you're really invested. It's not just how it turns out or whatever. And Jim's music has that emotional core. So when we did this, and he pretty much, he was well up for it, and he did it for for a very kind amount of money. Let's say it should have been more, but he and I both wanted to show what was possible when he and I walk hand in hand into Gotham. Sounds like Babes in the Wood, and Jim writes this amazingly emotional music, and I tell you the bit that gets me every time, it's not Magog's breakdown, although that gets me in a different way. It's at the beginning of book 2, where you've got the Statue of Liberty and the asylum seekers and that whole scene. And there's one bit where Green Lantern is, making this big fishing net, and he says, "Climb in the net, folks. My ring will take you to safety," or whatever it is. And then he says to himself, "Boy, I'm enjoying this," and the music there and everything that's going on in the context of what is happening. And I just, it's one of those moments where I would like to think if we were in a cinema or whatever, you would get up and go, yeah, that would be that's the idea of it. It's kind of like David Corrin Sweat saving the squirrel. It's got that kind of, yeah, that's the guy. That's my boy. Yeah. So actually, it is my boy. That's another one. Tom actually is playing Green Lantern. He passed that audition too. But that's not the point. It is about that, and the fact that in the comic book, in the graphic novel, beg your pardon, Red Robin, Dick Grayson, who was Robin, goes up into the Statue of Liberty's head, where these two weird alien creatures are controlling the fight and all of this, and there's no dialogue in the graphic novel. There doesn't need to be. But I thought, this is Robin. This is, quippy Dick Grayson, so, hey guys, I don't know if you know, but you're supposed to have tickets for the statue tour, all this stuff's going on. So it's introducing a bit of all the Batmans and Supermans and those comic moments which work without cheapening anything. It's not Otis played by Ned Beatty, bless him, which is like just a bit too far. They go, just come back on. It is genuinely kind of like, you'll need tickets for this, and by the way, here's your free Batarang. So that's the fun of it. I wanted there to be, even though it's Kingdom Come and it's very, very dark, moments where you just stand up and cheer and go, yes. Yeah. And another similar one is where Luthor, excuse me, runs away from the fight, and Blue Beetle catches him. He's, Luthor, Blue Beetle, I have to be somewhere, which is, and I actually asked Ray Porter, who plays, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Sorry, I'm running out of just a
Yeah, just take a swig. Take a swig.
Yeah, take a swig. It's gin, by the way. Uh, Ray Porter, who I first met 6 years ago at an Audi Awards do, and we saw each other across a crowded room, and we don't look dissimilar. He looks like Robert Plant's slightly more dissolute younger brother, and we kind of thought, yeah, that bloke's on my wavelength, and we immediately, clicked. And when I met him, I thought, you remind me of, there's something in your voice that reminds me of somebody. Anyway, when we get this gig, I know exactly who he reminds me of. He reminds me of William Hootkins, Bill Hootkins, who played Luthor in my original, from the very beginning for me, in Superman, who was also, for those who don't know, Porkins in Star Wars, and X-Wing pilot in the original Star Wars, and one of the CIA guys who recruits Dr. Jones to go and find the Lost Ark. So, Bill, big star, and he was actually shooting. He was shooting Batman when we were doing something. We were doing a comedy show, and he came in and did some point in London on this comedy show, and he said, "I've been playing Jack Nicholson. Some of the stuff we did together. He's really enjoying the funny stuff." So I was like, "All right, this is good." But Bill, bless him, was around for years, and then he passed. And there's Ray, and I've got a cast Luthor, and Ray. You know what? I bet he could channel Bill. So I said, "Look, would you do something?" And Ray and I love working together. He said, "Yeah, sure. What is it?" And I said, "Play Lex Luthor." He said, "Oh God, yeah, I'd love to play Lex Luthor." I said, "Yeah, but there's a catch." "What's the catch?" I said, I want you to play it with Bill Hootkins in mind." So he said, "Well, send me some of Bill." So I sent him some, clips from the old Supermans. Because Bill was he wasn't exactly chewing the scenery, but he was certainly licking the wallpaper.
Pretty damn close.
It's pretty damn close. When he finally gets Superman with the kryptonite, it's gotcha. All this stuff. Anyway, Ray totally nails Bill. And so there's this, this scene where he's, Blue Beetle, I really have to be somewhere, or whatever it is. And then, and there's a scene, the payoff scene with Luthor, where he's paying penance and doing menial work in the hospital for Bruce Wayne. There's a little diatribe, a little tirade he does, where he mentions his lawyers, Hootkins, Sessions, and Roberts, which is Bill Hootkins, Bob Sessions, Luthor, and Batman, and Bill Roberts, who was the best J. Jonah Jameson bar none, who was in my Spidey. He played Commissioner Gordon in Batman Nightfall. So that was my little moment to just salute, my heroes of the past, in my little private tiny world of audio.
I noticed that.
Yeah. So that was that. I take liberties like that. I check with the guys at DC. Is it okay? And it is okay. So we did it. Yeah. So it was a joy to do, and I'm very proud of the result. It was something that I don't think I could have done it better if we'd got the rights back in 96, 97. I maybe, the cast would have been a bit different because more people were still alive then. But in terms of actually turning out a piece of work that I feel, does justice both to how I do things and the subject, I think it's there.
It's definitely there. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm pretty sure all you guys will enjoy it. And here's actually the link to where actually you can buy Kingdom Come on audible.com. And if you want to check out the rest of Dirk's works, as quite a resume, his website.
Which I'll update, I promise. Apologies.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's still stuck in 2003.
Dirk, I can't thank you enough for coming on to talk to us. Before we go, I just have two things I want to say. First, you actually inspired me to write my own audio dramas. So wow. I had to thank you for that. I really had to thank you for that.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And I take your idea of audible movies very seriously when I do the scripts. because I don't like narration that much. Of course, there are some narration I have to do for certain scripts, but in
Yeah.
a good majority of them, I don't.
Yeah.
So that's the second. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, you still if you still want to do it, you could still try to do Dark Knight Returns. All you have to do is just pitch it.
Yeah. 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 I don't think it's happened as an audio for a while, if at all. I can't remember it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, who knows? Who knows? Yeah.
Who knows?
I'll get
Well,
Christmas out of the way and then I'll get
yes, yes.
pitching.
All right. Well, I can't thank you enough again. It was great
Thank you, Ian.
honor to have you on here, and hope to have you on again soon.
I hope to as well. Thanks so much, Ian. And it's been a real pleasure and a joy. And I'm just thrilled if it's given you pleasure and inspired you. That best thing possible.
It has.
Bless you. Thank you, sir.
Of course. Of course. Well, I think that's going to be it for us today, folks. I'm Ian Miller, and this has been Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. Have yourselves a good day.
Cheers.
Also, be sure to actually follow us on our social media accounts, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And if you'd like to follow us on YouTube, just hit that like button and subscribe.